Let's head to the phones. Joining us right now, GOP political strategist, Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chad. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's see. Let's start off with some statewide news before we get into all the healthcare stuff that's going on. In the must-read Texas newsletter that you sent out this morning, pretty big article out of San Antonio dealing with the battle between Speaker Joe Straus and Governor Abbott, along with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and I guess where people are falling along and maybe what people predict for the upcoming special session. Is a pretty big article, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And, these fault lines have been visible for some time, but they've really come into clear view in the last few weeks. And there's obviously a lot of anticipation going into the special session starting Tuesday, July 18th, with the Lieutenant Governor putting together a pretty solid list of conservative ideas and policy ideas that a lot of the folks in the grassroots at the base of the party are very motivated about, but that generally speaking, the Texas House is not motivated about, and so, or certainly not House leadership right now. And we saw Straus, the Speaker, come out, I forget if that was, I think it was middle or early last week, at a speech in front of the Texas Association of School Boards, not just throw cold water on school choice for special needs kids, but also throw cold water on another Privacy Act or so-called bathroom bill. And he went even beyond that and was a little bit more harsh in terms of some of the language he used about just the issues on the special session call. And so what's really interesting here, Chad, is on a lot of these issues, it's beginning to appear that the governor is siding with the lieutenant governor rather than the speaker. And, generally in legislative bodies, two beats one. But particularly in special sessions. But obviously, the interesting choice facing the speaker is he going to allow some of these items to move forward? Is he going to allow them to get out of committee? Can he block votes on the floor? Could he defeat votes on the floor? If you look just in the Privacy Act issue by itself, there's a bill that Ron Simmons, state representative from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, has 80 co-sponsors. A Privacy Act bill. That's the majority of the House, but that bill was not allowed to come up for a vote. They had a weaker version that did pass the House that the Senate was unwilling to accept. So, and the Speaker said that's as far as he's willing to go. So, look, I think the special session is going to be very interesting because, again, the House doesn't seem to be interested in passing a lot of these conservative bills. The Senate passed, I think, 10 of the 19 items through the Senate during the regular session. So there's an opportunity to get a lot done here. I mean, obviously, I don't think they're going to get all 19 items done, but if they could get 5 or 7 of them done in the special session that's just 30 days, that would be tremendously successful. And so right now the governor is working on identifying legislators who can sponsor these bills. He's announcing who's sponsoring them, who he's working with in both the House and Senate, and I think you're going to see them continue to do that. But the question is really going to come back to whether the House leadership is ultimately going to allow these things to move forward through the House.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak, let's take a look at the healthcare battle that's happening within the Republican Party right now. Senate GOP, they released their plan last week. It was met with some praise and then some not so much praise, even within the Republican Party. You've got Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and I forget one of the other U.S. senators who has already come out and said, we're working on it, but we're not there yet. And the more it becomes conservative, I think the thought process is you're going to lose the moderates in the Senate. So what do you know about the health care deal? Is this a good plan moving forward, or do they still have a lot of work to do to actually get this to a good point where we can lower premiums?
So I think it's important to understand that that Republicans faced a difficult choice, and this is both the White House and legislative leaders up on Capitol Hill, and that is, do they want to use reconciliation, which keeps it to a majority threshold in the Senate? Of course, you have 52 Republicans. You need 60 votes in the Senate to move anything generally. If you use reconciliation, then you only need 51 votes, which means you can have 50 Republican senators and the vice president breaking the tie. That allows you to lose 2 votes and pass such a bill. The problem is that there are procedural and budgetary limitations put on bills that use reconciliation. Basically, they have to be budget neutral over 10 years. And then there are other sort of procedural limitations in terms of how it works. And so basically the point here, Chad, is that if they were going to use reconciliation, which is a way to pass something on health care, we knew all along we were not going to get a full repeal of Obamacare. And that's not what this bill is, and there's no one that's even claiming that it's that. And so for some conservatives, it is frustrating. It doesn't do everything that we all would like to have it do. That said, it is just one step. It's the first step. The second step will be the HHS secretary taking actions through the regulatory aspects of his department, and then you might need a third bill once these changes are made. I do think it's worth voting for at this point. I do think it's going to get better this week. If you look at those 4 conservative senators, the fourth was Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. They all, I think, would like to see states be able to opt out of Obamacare and develop their own health care plans without federal intrusion. So I think that may be what Cruz and Mike Lee are pushing for. If you look at some of the moderates like Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, they want to see the bill be a little bit more generous, perhaps on things like Medicaid expansion. So I think there's a little bit of legislative posturing right now on all sides where people are trying to get a little bit better deal for their own populations. And that's the calculus they're trying to figure out right now. They're trying to figure out a way to get to 50 votes plus the vice president, and if they can do that before July 4th, that will allow them to then move on to tax reform when they get back before the August recess, at least in the House, and keep them on track to get those two issues, health care and tax reform, both done before the end of this calendar year.
How much discussion do you think has there been between House leadership and Senate leadership on this bill? Because you still got to get the House on board as well, correct?
That's right. And so there's two ways for that to happen. That's a good question. The first is, obviously, the House could just take up the Senate bill and pass it. And I saw there was a quote from an unnamed Republican lawmaker saying that's what they expected would happen. That's kind of interesting to me because that's not what I expect will happen. What I expect will happen is the House and Senate will appoint conferees. They'll go to a conference committee. They'll hammer out the differences. And then they'll try to pass the bill again through the House and the Senate both. So those are the two pathways. I do think there's been a lot of conversations, but it's pretty clear that the Senate leadership really kept the contents of this bill, in front of a very small circle of senators. There were senators that were in the working group, including Ted Cruz, who had not seen the final bill text until it was released publicly. So, this is a bit dicey, and obviously there's a question. I think they passed the health care bill with 2 votes. I think they passed it 2 votes more than they needed in the House. So there's a very narrow margin to begin with. So we'll have to see what happens with that. Obviously, they've got to find a way to make sure they can get 50 votes plus the vice president, perhaps this week. And if they can do that, they're going to do it. And honestly, the longer this takes, the easier it's going to be for them to find a way to defeat this bill. And if they have recess, July 4th recess, that entire week to do that, you're going to see opponents across the country step up and do everything they can to try to defeat the bill. Time is actually not on the Senate side, I think, on an issue like this that's this complicated and this politically difficult.
Matt, tell folks where they can get your podcast, and I know you've got a couple of columns out this week as well.
Yeah, just had my biweekly column, The Austin American Statesman, is up. You can read about my predictions for the special session, why I think it's important. My podcast, Mac on Politics, M-A-C-K on Politics, is available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and also on the web at mackonpolitics.com. My latest guest was Mark Bowden, the author of Black Hawk Down and a number of other books. He just wrote a piece on North Korea in the Atlantic. It's a very interesting conversation about North Korea. And, of course, you can sign up for the daily Must-Read Texas email that pulls all the news from around the state into one place, and it's delivered to your inbox Monday through Friday at mustreadtexas.com.
All right. As always, Matt, thank you very much. We'll visit with you next week. Or not next week, actually. I think we may be off next week. I'll let you know. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Sounds good. Have a great week.
All right. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.